Hi everyone, I'm Geri Ford and welcome to my studio. It's Thursday night and we're going to learn about half square triangles and quarter square triangles. I've got all different kinds of methods for you to make them. How do you tell the difference between half square, quarter square? It's mind-boggling sometimes, but hopefully this video will make things a little easier and it'll give you different options on making your own quarter square and half square triangles. So let's get started. Okay, so what are half square triangles and what are quarter square triangles? Well, they basically look the same. It's a right angled triangle. Difference between whether it's a quarter square or a half square is where the grain lines are. What's the difference? Okay, a lot of people will use them interchangeably, but the difference is where the grain is. If the grain is going this way, the short sides on this right square triangle are going with the grain, and the seam that puts two of them together is on the bias. So this would be a bias edge, so it means this is stretchy. A quarter square triangle is pretty much the opposite. This will be the bias, and this will be the straighter grain. They're mostly used interchangeably, but they are important if you've got a heavy quilt that's going to be a wall hanging or something, because the bias is going to stretch. Most of the time, when we're quilting, we don't care. This quilt block is made up of entirely half square triangles. You got a light and a dark, and both red and green. And this is simple 9-patch made with half square triangles. And my grain is going this way, and these seams are along the bias edge. What blocks use these? Well, this is just a simple 9-patch. Other ones that use a half square triangle is, here's the typical churn dash or monkey wrench. This is a maple leaf pattern, and you have half square triangles here, 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 and around, and then just a fancier one here. That one is a paper pieced one. Simple to do. So once you master learning how to make a half square triangle, there's pretty much, you can do anything. Okay, another one that's a half square triangle here. Actually, these are both pretty much the same. Okay, this one, they're both a version of a Ohio star, where this one is made using flying geese, but flying geese uses a half square triangle in creating the flying geese. Now we'll cover that in a different lesson. And this one here is a typical Ohio star, but with a pinwheel in the middle. Okay, the pinwheel, this part, is entirely 4 half square triangles just turned. The grains are going this way and this way on all of these blocks. See, this one here looks like it's a flying geese, and it isn't. It's seamed here. This is 2 half square triangles put with the same color in the center. So it looks like a flying geese. This one is a true flying geese, which means that it's used a rectangle with a half square triangle on each edge of the rectangle. This shape right here are half square triangles. Very nice here. Okay, this diamond in the middle, that's 4 different pieces of fabric because they're attached to these. This little piece right here there's a half square triangle and a half square triangle position this way, but the fabrics are seamed in the middle, so it looks like one piece of fabric that was very hard to put together. Again, it's a pinwheel, and you think, oh, that's a quarter square, because sometimes when you see a pinwheel shape, they'll say, oh, that is a quarter square triangle. Oh, no, not really. This right here looks just like a half square triangle put together. The difference here is that my straighter grain on this piece is going this way with these on the bias. The short ends are on the bias. They look the same. If I used half square triangles, you'd have to really look close at the grain line to see if it's really a quarter square triangle or a half square. They can be used interchangeably if having your design on point, and it's going to be a long hanging quilt, big hanging quilt, show quilt, take the time. Otherwise, don't worry about it. Okay, now how do we make these things? Okay, you can make them one at a time, two at a time, four at a time. Although 4 at a time technically is a quarter square triangle, and you'll see in a minute why. 8 at a time by the strip, and then I've got a really neat one that I will show you in the back called an accordion, how to put it together, accordion style, and they're unlimited number. Okay, so let's go first to the 1 at a time. If you're doing 1 at a time, this is something I rarely do. It might be because you fussy cut it. You could have a template, because some templates will come with the dog ears already cut off. Or if you want to fussy cut it, scan and cut pieces. AccuQuilt Go will give you individual pieces. And this is going to be when you're going to do one. So before cutting that out, I would recommend that you, first of all, spray starch your fabric before you cut it. Why? Because you're going to be sewing on this bias. And bias is kind of unsteady, and it tends to grow crooked, and it tends to distort and stretch. So if you spray starch it, that will help eliminate some of that. So that's simply 2 half square triangles that are cut out. And your template will tell you how big to make them. I'm trying to attempt a 2.5 inch finished square. And I'm going to sew 1/4 inch here. Now, stitch length when you're on the bias, you might want to go a little bit tighter. Instead of using a 2.5 millimeter stitch, you might drop down to a 1.5 or a 2 in order to sew a 1/4 inch seam. I'm using my 1/4 inch foot, and I'm just putting the edge of the fabric right along that 1/4 inch edge. You can use a 1/4 inch foot with guide or without, whatever's comfortable for you. You don't back tack, and we're just going to sew straight. The thinner your thread, the more accurate will be your measurement. I'm going to sew this just straight, no back tacking. I'm just going to sew straight across, being as straight as I can. Don't pull on it. Okay, it's sewn, so I'm going to press it. First, I'm going to press it using a dry iron. Don't iron, just press. I like to use this mat because of the fact that this won't shift, and it helps to keep the seam from stretching. So I'm just going to simply roll it over and press towards the dark. Measuring this, and it is exactly 2.5 inches, so it's the size that I want. Disadvantages to this is a bias. It's harder to sew straight, and it's harder to keep an accurate 1/4 inch. The other thing too is the thicker your thread, the more is taken up by the seam and will give you a less accurate size. It's a little tedious. Advantages is if you're using templates or you just want 1 or 2, this is the way to go. Disadvantages, you have to trim off these dog ears. What's good about this is there's no math. You just cut out your template and you sew it. That's it. But you have to be real ginger with your pressing and with your sewing at the same time. Another easier way to do a single design is there's no math involved here either. If you need a 2.5 inch, you simply cut a 2.5 inch square, and you're going to put these right sides together. Okay, and I'm going to take my marker and I'm going to draw a line or if you've got a laser marker on your sewing machine, you don't have to draw a line, but I'm going to draw a line so that you can see it, okay? And I'm simply going to sew from one end to the other. I'm just going to sew it, and I will be back. So now, this one's got a little bit more waist. So this one I've sewn from one corner to the other. I'm going to trim away 1/4 inch to the right of this line. You can use scissors or a rotary cutter, it's up to you. Then you might want to also seam this side, and that way you've got an extra piece, otherwise they're scraps. Okay, and then once again, I'm going to press. And let's measure it. Here's my ruler. It is 2.5 by 2.5, so it is accurate in size. Having some waist is the biggest drawback to this particular method. Okay, another advantage to this is that when I've sewn it, I don't have any dog ears to cut off, so that's one advantage. My favorite way and the most popular way to make a half square triangle is to do 2 at a time. They're going to be 2 identical ones. Traditionally, it says whatever finished size you want of your half square triangle, add 7/8 of an inch. I will add at least an inch. I have cut my 2 squares 3.5. I'm going to draw that line down the center of the lighter one. And then you can mark 1/4 of an inch on either side. Now, I will usually do a scant 1/4 of an inch, which means I'm going to move it over. Here's my line right here. I'm going to put that on that diagonal line I just drew, and I'm going to move it over just a little bit so that I can see the whole blue line. So it's moving it over by just a little. And I can turn it over and do the same thing. You don't have to draw them on. If you're comfortable with your foot, here is the 1/4 inch foot with a guide. Okay, so here's my diagonal line that I drew, that I would put this guide right on that line and sew, and that way it would give me a 1/4 inch. But I want to do a scant 1/4 of an inch. Instead of moving on the line, I'm going to move just inside the line, so it'll give me a little bit less than a 1/4 of an inch seam. I'm going to have to trim. I prefer to have a little bit narrower seam and have to size it down than to have to pick it out and re-sew it. Here is my diagonal through the center. Normally 1/4 inch, I'm going to put my guide right here along this edge and sew, but I'm going to scoot it over about 1/16 of an inch. And if you can follow the guide, you don't need the lines. And I'm just going to sew straight across. And then I'll come down the other side and do the exact same thing. For this, you don't need to have a rotary cutter. I'm just going to cut right down on the line. There. Again, I'm going to press it open and press it towards the dark, just like before, and we'll measure this. Okay, one disadvantage is you have to cut off dog ears. Okay, now this is big, but I want it 2.5 inches, so what I do is I trim them. This one takes a little bit more time for trimming, but you end up with an extremely accurate block. Turn it over, and now measure it so that it finishes at 2.5 inches, and I trim. That gives me a perfect 2.5 by 2.5. I have two blocks that are identical, so I would trim this one same way. Usually if it's close, I start with the tip, the 1 by 1 inch tip at the top, right? Lay my diagonal down so that that line covers that diagonal seam. I've got a little bit to trim everywhere. Turn it and trim the other way to 2.5 by 2.5. And I match up 2.5 by 2.5 here. Make sure that this line is on, directly on that diagonal seam line. That way you know when you put these blocks together, they're going to come together perfectly, so it'll be easier to match up points when you're sewing your block together. The advantages, it's easy math. You don't have to think crazy numbers. It's just add an inch. And then it has very little waste. You get perfect results. Okay, now the drawback is sometimes it takes a little bit of time to draw those lines. And then sometimes if you've got a lot to square up, it can be a little tedious, but that's just fine. Quarter square triangles or half square triangles, 4 at a time. But in actuality, these are quarter square triangles. What you do is you figure out the size that you want it. So I want it unfinished. In other words, before it's finished into a block. So this is a 2.5 inches finished, unfinished block. But when I finish sewing all the 4 sides, it'll end up as a 2-inch block. Remember, you got a 1/2 inch for the seams. So you would take the 2.5 inches, and then you're going to multiply that by 0.64 and then add a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch. Okay, that's like not gonna happen. So ShannonFrazierDesigns.ca, and I'll put the link in below, has got a tutorial on how to make she calls them half square triangles, 4 at a time, and in reality they're quarter square, dealing with grain line triangles. She's got a nice chart that tells you how to cut these. So in other words, I need these 2.5, and according to her chart, for a 2.5 inch unfinished half square triangle, you're going to want to cut this 4 inches. So I have 4 inches by 4 inches. I've cut it. I'm going to sew 1/4 inch all the way around this outside, and I'll go ahead and do this off camera because you know how to sew a straight line. Okay, I'll be back. Okay, I sewed it in blue so you could see it a little better. And then you're going to simply cut these on the diagonal. It helps to have one of these turning Olfa mats, or any of them that will turn for you, or a small one. You want to go all the way across, cut, don't move these. Okay, and now we open them up. Okay, these are very delicate on this edge and this edge because those are bias edges. So I'm going to carefully press that. Okay, disadvantages, you have dog ears. And let's check these out. Just it needs a little trimming, but very scant trimming. Be very careful that you don't trim too much. And trimming does take off those dog ears. They really do. And so there's very little waste, just like the half square triangles. The only difference is this is creating bias on the edges. It looks the same, doesn't it? Looks exactly the same as this one. The only difference is this is a straight grain and this is a bias. See how that can stretch? So you have to be a little more careful with these. So these are great on point. if you're doing half square triangles on point, or you want to put your whole pinwheel or whatever on point, cut them as quarter square, because then now when you put that on point, your grain lines are in the correct direction. They're all going this way and this way. Whereas versus when you use this other one, if you were to put them this way, now this is now your vertical and horizontal lines are going to be on the bias. So that's the advantage to that. I mean, without the chart, it's hard to figure out. If you want a copy of the chart, I'll put a link in the description below so that you can download your own chart from Shannon Fraser. Okay, now this way makes, in actuality, quarter square triangles because of the grain line, but you could call them half square, just like the last one. This one is done with a strip, so if you've got 2.5-inch strips, or this works great with jelly rolls. So for this one, I want a 2.5-inch half square triangle. So I'm going to sew 1/4 inch on either side of this strip, and I'll do that off camera. I've sewn it 1/4 inch on either side. I happen to have a triangle ruler, but if you don't have a triangle ruler, you would take your regular square ruler. Okay, you have the 45-degree angle on your ruler. I'm going to put that at the bottom, right here. Put this at the edge of the fabric. Align this edge here and cut. Okay. You've got one piece of waste right here. Okay, and then put the opposite side at the bottom of the ruler, right at the tip. Leave that along. You're flipping your ruler, so I'm going this way. I'm putting this at the bottom, so I have the edge. See the point right at the seam line? Okay, and now when you open that, it is bigger than 2.5 inches. In fact, it is turning out to be a 3-inch. Here's the 45-degree line here. Put this on the other side. Here's my 45-degree line. And then you cut it again. Okay. Flip it. 45 degrees here. And I'm putting the 45 degree along that seam and then cut. Okay, you still have a little more weight. This is not one I like to use because this is very, well, yeah, see, I messed that up, didn't I? But you know what, it's overly large, and I'm not totally crazy about it. Let me press them open. But they're all going to be the same end piece, but that's waste. That's fine. So I ended up getting, out of that 6-inch strip, I got 1, 2, 3 squares. And then now trim these back to now you've got plenty of room here, so you can get a nice cut. Got a little more waste. But these are quarter square triangles, and I cut this back to 2.5 inches. Again, lining this up. And it gives me a nice quarter square triangle. Okay? If you want this to be a true half square triangle with the grain, you're going to have to cut your strips on the bias. I'm not doing that. So this is not my favorite way. Okay, to make 8 half square triangles, and these will be true half square triangles, you want to pick your piece of fabric. It's going to be a little bit bigger. So you're going to use whatever formula you use for the double, except for you're going to double that. So I want 2.5-inch finished triangles, or unfinished because they're not in a block yet. I will add 7/8 of an inch, or forget that, I'm going to add 1 inch and then double it. So 2.5 inches, add an inch, 3.5 inches, double that, 7 inches. So I need to start with a 7-inch square. I added an extra 1/4 of an inch just to be sure I have extra wiggle room. Then I'm going to take my marker and I'm going to mark from diagonal to diagonal. This way and this way. You can mark, if you like, your sewing lines, and I like to use a scant 1/4 of an inch. I'm just going to draw them because it's easier that way for me, and that way you can see what I'm doing. So here's a scant 1/4 of an inch, and I will draw it in. If you like, you can take this in the center, find your center marks, and just draw a dotted line, because these are going to be your cutting lines. Right through the center. Okay. I'm going to sew just like I did the half square triangle when I was doing 2. I'm going to do 4 lines, and okay, here we go. So here's marked just like before. Okay, so I'm just going to go on either side. Okay, sorry, I already cut it. So, but anyway, so here it is finished. So what you do is first cut right through the center, vertical and horizontal without moving it, and then you can pick up any of these edges and just cut them right down the middle. You don't have to make all these lines. If you're comfortable with just the one diagonal, then that will be just fine. Okay, same thing, you're going to press flat, press open, and see it's bigger than I need, so I'm going to trim that back to 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches. And then you will have 8 of these squares, identical squares. Okay, so this gives you more wiggle room. Actually, you don't have to add any, well, and then 2.5. This one ended up with a little more waste, which means that probably the next time I make these, instead of making it 7.25 like I had cut these, just cut them to maybe 7 inches, a little less. And see, now I've got a perfect half square triangle. This method is going to be marked pretty much the same as you do the 2 half square triangles at a time, but the difference is that you're going to have all different fabrics. You need to have at least 6 for this to work. You're going to take the backs of these and you're going to mark the diagonals. For this, I don't normally mark the sewing lines. You can if you feel like you need to. Now what I did with all of these, because they're all different, and this is going to give you totally different blocks every single time. So I drew my diagonal down the middle. If you've got the laser on your on your machine, the laser pointer grid, you don't need to do that. You don't need to draw it. But because this is the first time I'm doing this and I'm not real sure what I'm doing here, I'm going to draw this line, the sewing line, the scant 1/4 inch on the right side of the diagonal. For better instructions to get this accordion half square triangle method, you want to go to Paige Quilt Designs. I'll put the link in the description below. She's got tutorials on YouTube, and there's 3 of them that explain this a lot better than I can do. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this. So I'm going to start by putting 2 together, right sides together. So I want these diagonals the same way. Okay. Okay, I'm going to start by, I want the diagonals going the same way here. Here's my diagonal here. That's why a lot of people don't draw them. And I'm going to start by sewing on this line. So let me show you. Let's go to the machine. I have the center lines. If you look at this one and you turn this one over, that line is on the opposite side. That's okay. So I'm going to sew right here on this one line. I'm going to take this and fold this over this way. Then I'm going to push my hand from underneath and pull all of this to the left. So let me do that again. I take my top piece, pull it over to the right, take the bottom and everything on the bottom, push it to the left. Okay. Take my next piece. I have see that line here? Where's my diagonal line that I put? I'm going to match these diagonal lines right at the corner here and here. And I'm going to sew right on the sewing line. Top piece to the right. Everything from underneath to the left, so that you have a single layer of fabric. Take my next one. I mark this again. This. I'll do this one more time. Now, to me, it's easier to mark that second line because I'm not familiar with this method yet. But I see this is going to be a lot faster. Okay, same thing. Pull this underneath, push that to the left. Top, right, bottom, left. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and continue to do these until you want to do at least 6 of them. They get a little hard to handle if you try to do this less than 6. And then when I get as many as I want, then I will be back. Okay, I just finished sewing the last one. So here's the 2 I sewed together to the right of the large diagonal line. And now, if you look, I have almost like an accordion with about a ½ inch in between. Okay, so now I'm going to push this one underneath at the right end. I'm going to take this single one from the first one that I did, match up the corners. If you want to put a pin, you can, because it can be a little bit overwhelming here. When you've got so many of them. Okay, and then sew the last set. Need a new scrap piece. Okay, so now if you look on the back of one of them, you see 2, just like we did the double, and you end up with like an umbrella full of stuff. Okay, then you put your hand in the middle, and I want to always always cut through a single layer of fabric. So here I'm going to cut using the scissors right on the diagonal line, and look at here. Okay, and now I can come over here to all of the diagonal lines and just start cutting them. Remember, always a single layer of fabric, look. Okay, no two will be exactly the same. You go to the next one, find the next. Or if you like, you can put this down on and use a rotary cutter to go through it, but I don't feel comfortable with a rotary cutter. Here, I'm liable to go through all the layers at one time. Okay, and just cut. See, look at that, it's so cool. Cut through the middle. It's going to be inside, so if it's not a perfect 1/4 inch, it's okay. That is awesome. Okay, now I have every single one of these is different. So now I'll go ahead and press them like before, and then you can start playing with them and make your quilt block. These are amazing. Thank you so much, Eva Paige Quilt Designs, for coming up with this genius method of doing these scrappy half square triangles that are always perfect. Oh my goodness. Here's a dark. I'm going to press all these open, and of course these are a little bit oversized, just like the regular. See, look, look. That would help if I could just press. Okay, see, these are using the same, but there are no two exactly the same, which is why I totally love this. And it was pretty fast. My only complaint is that because I cut these by hand, they're not absolutely perfect. I could go back and straighten these up with the rotary cutter, but they're going to be inside, so I'm not really I'm not too concerned. Yeah, see, this one isn't perfect on the end. It's okay. I didn't cut it just right. That's fine. Now when I trim them up, they will be perfect. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and finish pressing these, and then I will trim them off camera just like we did before. And like they're bigger than 2.5 inches, so these are going to work out really well to get a lot of 2.5 inch that all are different. I love it. Okay, I'll see you in a bit. Okay, here they are. They're all finished, and they are all, every single one of them is different. That was fun. There's a lot of times where I need things like, see, these have the same fabric, but they're different. I'm missing one. I dropped one. I had 12. Well, I dropped one somewhere. Okay, well, I'll just substitute in that one. Okay, so now, aren't these wonderful? So I have 12 blocks here. This I could put together and make a really cute scrappy quilt. I could also use, like, alternate a light and a dark, a light and a dark, a light and a dark, so therefore you end up, or you can use the same background with different fabrics. There's all kinds of things you can do with this accordion method. I totally love it. Thank you so much, Eva Paige, and I will go ahead and put the link in the description below. Okay, half square triangles, 1/4 square triangles. I hope you enjoyed this program tonight. You found all different kinds of ways to make half and 1/4 square triangles. Find the method that suits you and then quilt yourself silly. If you have any questions, don't forget to send me an email at waltzquilt@yahoo.com and I'll be happy to answer them for you, or at least try. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment. And I'll see you next time. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of my new videos. See you later. Bye-bye.